I still remember the exact moment the entire conference room went silent. Not the kind of silence that happens when people are thinking or waiting for someone to speak, but the kind that feels heavy, like the air itself suddenly forgot how to move. It happened right after I raised my voice. I didn't yell. I didn't slam my hand on the table. My voice wasn't even particularly loud. But there was something in it that day. Something sharper than anger. Something deeper than frustration. Conviction, and apparently that was enough to make everyone in that room freeze. My supervisor, Catherine Hale, stood about 3 feet away from me. Her face flushed in a way that looked like it was trying to decide between fury and disbelief. Around us, the other employees pretended to look at their laptops or shuffle papers, but I could feel their attention like a spotlight burning into my back. One of them, Derek, a guy who had been with the company for 15 years and liked to remind everyone of it, muttered under his breath that I should be grateful I even had a job. And then something happened that nobody in that office expected. Catherine stepped forward, closer than any supervisor should ever stand to an employee during a confrontation. And for a moment the tension between us felt like electricity snapping through the room. Then she kissed me, right there, in front of everyone, and trust me, I know what that sounds like. If you were watching that moment from the outside, you'd probably think you understood the story immediately. You'd think it was some office romance drama, or maybe even something manipulative or inappropriate. But what if I told you that moment was the result of 6 months of pressure, truth, humiliation, courage, and change that none of those people in the room could even begin to understand? So tell me honestly, before I go any further, if you were in my position, if you had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, and suddenly the person with the most power in room publicly chose your side, would you have handled it any differently than I did? 6 months earlier, my mornings started at exactly 5:30 a.m. every single day in a small apartment in Cleveland, Ohio. The building was old, the kind of brick place that had probably watched 3 generations of working families come and go. But it was clean and it was affordable, and after everything my life had been through, that was enough. I worked as a logistics coordinator at Hale Distribution Services, which sounded a lot more impressive than it actually was. Mostly it meant managing shipment routes, solving scheduling problems, and cleaning up mistakes made by people higher up the ladder than me. The paycheck covered rent, groceries, and my daughter Zoe's school supplies, which meant there wasn't much left for anything else, but I didn't mind, because every morning when I walked into the kitchen, Zoe would already be sitting at the table watching cartoons with those bright braids bouncing around her shoulders, and suddenly none of stress mattered. She was 7 years old, and she had the kind of laugh that made a whole room feel warmer. I'd make her breakfast while she told me about whatever imaginary adventure she had dreamed up the night before. And before she left for school, I always reminded her of the same thing. Hold your head high, baby girl. I'd tell her, no matter what anybody says or how they look at you, you remember who you are. She would nod with this serious little expression that always broke my heart a little, because no 7-year-old should already understand why those words matter. But she did. She had already noticed the way some people looked at me in public places, the way store clerks watched us more carefully than other customers, the way certain neighbors got quiet when we walked by. Kids notice more than adults think they do, and I never lied to her about the world, but I tried to teach her something stronger than bitterness. Dignity, the kind that doesn't disappear just because someone else refuses to see it. Work was complicated. I showed up early every day, did my job well, and stayed out of office politics as much as possible. But after a while, you start noticing patterns, whether you want to or not. My ideas in meetings were ignored until someone else repeated them. My projects were always the difficult ones no one else wanted. Promotions somehow skipped over me even when my performance reviews were strong. And every time I questioned it, the answer was always the same. You're imagining things. Be patient. Keep working hard. So I did. Because I had Zoe depending on me, and bitterness doesn't pay the rent. My wife Denise used to tell me I was too patient sometimes. She had a way of seeing the truth in situations long before I was ready to admit it. Denise passed away 4 years ago during what was supposed to be a routine surgery, and losing her felt like someone had suddenly taken the map out of my hands while I was still trying to navigate life. After she died, every decision felt heavier, every mistake felt bigger, and every night after Zoe went to sleep, I would sit in the quiet living room staring at Denise's photo, wondering if I was doing this whole parenting thing right. The regional supervisor at work was Catherine Hale. She was 34, ambitious, extremely organized, and the kind of person who believed deeply that hard work solved every problem. On the surface, that sounded admirable, but there was a blind spot in that belief she didn't even realize she had. Catherine truly thought she treated everyone equally, which meant she never stopped to question why some employees always seemed to struggle more than others under the same rules. Her father had been a district manager for the company years ago, and although she rarely mentioned it, his connections had quietly opened the first door of her career. She believed everything after that was pure merit. That belief made her confident, but it also made her blind. The first real crack in that blindness happened during a quarterly meeting in March, when a shipment delay cost the company a client worth more than $200,000 a year. Somehow, the conversation kept drifting toward me, even though the error had nothing to do with my department. I sat there listening while people hinted and implied, and carefully avoided saying anything directly. Finally, I spoke up, calmly, methodically. I laid out the documentation proving exactly where the mistake had occurred. Emails, timestamps, scheduling records. By the time I finished, the room had gone completely quiet. Catherine looked annoyed more than anything else, like she didn't appreciate being corrected in front of her staff. But the facts were undeniable. Later that day, Derek cornered me in the break room with that same smug expression he always wore. "Must be nice playing the victim card," he said, leaning against the counter like he owned the place. Some of us actually had to earn our spot here. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the only answer worth giving. That evening, when I picked Zoe up from school, she had been crying. A boy in her class had told her that her dad probably worked as a janitor because that's all people like us could do. Hearing that felt like someone squeezing my heart with their bare hands. I held her in the parking lot and told her the same thing I always did. Nobody decides your worth but you. A few days later, something happened that Catherine accidentally witnessed. Zoe and I were at a grocery store when a woman accused her of stealing a candy bar she hadn't even touched. The woman grabbed my daughter's arm and demanded she empty her pockets. I knelt beside Zoe and calmly told the woman she would apologize immediately. Maybe it was the way I said it, or maybe it was the crowd gathering around us, but the woman backed down and muttered an apology before walking away. What I didn't realize until later was that Catherine had been sitting in a cafe next door, watching the entire thing through the window. And that moment changed the way she saw me forever, because for the first time she wasn't looking at an employee on a spreadsheet. She was looking at a father protecting his child from a world that had already started judging her before she was old enough to understand why. And that was the beginning of everything that followed. I still remember the exact moment everything went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself has frozen. 1 second, there was the hum of conversations, the clinking of glasses, the low murmur of executives discussing quarterly projections, and the next second everyone was staring at me. Not because I had shouted, not because I had done anything dramatic, but because my supervisor, Catherine Hale, had just stepped forward in front of the entire conference room and kissed me. Right there, in front of everyone. And the strangest part is that it didn't even feel like the most shocking thing that had happened that day. Because a few seconds earlier, Derek, the guy who had spent years making little comments under his breath about people like me, had muttered that I should be grateful I still had a job. And Catherine heard him. She heard him, stepped forward, and before anyone could process what was happening, she closed the distance between us and pressed her lips against mine like the entire world had suddenly stopped. Turning, the room froze, I froze, she froze too, right after she pulled back and realized what she'd done. You could almost hear everyone thinking the same thing at the same time. What the hell just happened? So now, I'm asking you the same question I've been asking myself ever since that moment. Was I wrong for letting things get to that point? Or would you have done the same thing if you were in my shoes? Because the truth is, the story didn't start with that kiss. It started months earlier, back when my life was much simpler. Back when the biggest thing on my mind was making sure my daughter Zoe had pancakes before school and making it to the office on time without thinking too much about the quiet battles I fought every day. 6 months earlier, my alarm clock went off at 5:30 every morning in a small brick apartment in Cleveland. The building wasn't fancy. It was the kind of place that had seen generations of working families pass through its hallways. But it was clean, affordable, and close enough to Zoe's school that we could walk on warm mornings. Zoe was 7 years old and the center of my entire universe. She had braids that bounced when she ran and a laugh that made even the worst days feel lighter. Every morning, she sat at the kitchen table watching cartoons while I made breakfast. And every morning before she left for school, I told her the same thing. Hold your head high, baby girl. No matter what anyone says, no matter how they look at you, you remember who you are. She always nodded seriously, like a tiny philosopher processing something bigger than herself. The truth was she had already started noticing things kids shouldn't have to notice. The way people sometimes stared at us in stores. The way security guards followed us a little too closely in certain aisles. The way some parents at school seemed surprised when they realized I was her father. I never explained these things directly. Instead, I tried to show her through how I carried myself, calm, respectful, dignified, even when people didn't deserve it. Because I wanted her to grow up believing her worth wasn't determined by the ignorance of strangers. My job at Hale Distribution Services was supposed to be simple. I worked as a logistics coordinator, which meant I handled shipment routes, scheduling, and problem solving when deliveries went sideways. I was good at it. Not just good, actually exceptional. But excellence doesn't always get rewarded the way people like to pretend it does. I arrived early every day, handled my responsibilities, helped coworkers when they were overwhelmed, and rarely complained. Yet somehow, my suggestions in meetings were ignored until someone else repeated them 10 minutes later. Somehow, the toughest assignments always landed on my desk. Somehow, promotions kept passing me by, while people with half my experience moved up the ladder. And whenever I asked questions, I was told the same thing. Be patient, work hard, your time will come. I'd heard that line for years. Meanwhile, my white colleagues received praise for average work, while my best work was treated like the bare minimum. I kept quiet because I needed the job, because Zoe depended on me. Because after my wife Denise died 4 years earlier during a surgery that was supposed to be routine, I didn't have the luxury of risking stability. Losing Denise broke something inside me. She had been the fire in our family, the one who never stayed silent when something wasn't right. She would have marched straight into that office and demanded answers. But after she was gone, I felt like I was navigating the world without a compass. Every night after Zoe fell asleep, I sat in the living room staring at photos of Denise and wondering what she would have done in my place. Catherine Hale had been the regional supervisor for about 2 years. She was young, ambitious, and extremely confident in her belief that the system was fair. In her mind, anyone could succeed if they worked hard enough. She had started as an entry-level employee and climbed her way up quickly. What she never acknowledged was that her father had been a district manager for the same company. Doors had opened for her long before she realized they were even locked for others. She wasn't cruel. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, she was something far more complicated, blind. She genuinely believed she treated everyone equally, which meant she never noticed when equality produced inequality. The first real crack in that illusion happened during a quarterly review meeting in March. A major shipment delay had cost the company a huge client. Somehow, the conversation kept circling back to me, even though the mistake came from another department. No one accused me directly. They just asked questions that implied responsibility, sideways glances, subtle doubt. I sat quietly for almost half the meeting before finally speaking up. I had documentation proving the delay occurred before the schedule reached my desk. Emails, timestamps, every piece of evidence neatly organized. When I laid it out calmly, the room fell silent. Catherine didn't like being corrected. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw. Afterward, Derek cornered me in the break room with that smirk he always wore. "Must be nice playing the victim card," he said. "Some of us actually have to earn our place here." I didn't respond. I poured my coffee and walked away. That night, Zoe was crying when I picked her up from school. A boy had told her that her father probably worked as a janitor because that's what people like us did. Her teacher heard it and said nothing. I knelt beside her in the parking lot and wiped her tears, feeling something inside me fracture. "He's wrong," I told her softly. "People say things when they don't understand the world, but we know who we are." She hugged me tightly, and the whole drive home I wondered how many times she'd have to learn that lesson before she grew up. Catherine started paying closer attention to me after that meeting. She noticed how I worked, how other employees asked for my help, how problems seemed to get solved when I got involved. One day, she called me into her office expecting a routine conversation about productivity. Instead, I told her what it felt like to work there, truly told her. For the first time, someone in management actually listened. Weeks later, everything exploded when I discovered Derek had taken credit for a route optimization proposal I had submitted. The exact same idea, same numbers, same strategy, but now it was being praised as Derek's innovation. I walked into Catherine's office with copies of my original documents. I told her everything, every slight, every stolen opportunity, every moment I swallowed my frustration because I needed that paycheck. And when I finished, she said something I never expected to hear. "I'm afraid that was the moment something changed between us. The months that followed were complicated." Catherine started implementing policy changes, blind proposal reviews, documentation for evaluations, diversity training that had been ignored for years. She faced resistance from executives who thought the system worked just fine. Through it all, we started talking more. Late nights at the office turned into long conversations about life, values, and the kind of world we wanted to help build. Somewhere along the way, those conversations turned into something deeper. The night we kissed for the first time was after a brutal meeting with senior executives who mocked her diversity initiatives. She was standing by the window looking out over Cleveland's skyline when she said quietly, "I thought I understood the world. I didn't. I took her hand. She stepped closer, and we crossed a line neither of us expected. For months we kept it private, but secrets have a way of collapsing under pressure. Which brings me back to that conference room, Derek's comment, Catherine's reaction, the kiss that stunned everyone. The aftermath was chaos. Rumors spread instantly. Some people accused me of manipulating her for career advancement. Others claimed she had been tricked or coerced. Almost nobody believed two adults could simply care about each other. Catherine eventually addressed the entire company in a meeting where she admitted the system had been flawed and announced sweeping policy reforms. Derek was investigated for intellectual property theft and quietly transferred out of the department. The company introduced oversight measures that prevented supervisors from claiming ideas without documentation. And for the first time in years, I felt like my work was finally being seen. Catherine and I eventually reported our relationship to HR and restructured reporting lines to remove the conflict of interest. It wasn't easy. There were whispers, judgments, people who assumed the worst. But through it all, we kept moving forward together. Zoe met Catherine months later. I was nervous about that moment more than anything else in my life. But Zoe looked at her and said, "You make my dad smile a lot." And Catherine knelt down and said, "He makes the world better." That was enough for Zoe. Looking back now, I realize the story wasn't really about that kiss in the conference room. It was about what happens when people finally see each other clearly after years of misunderstanding. It was about courage, the courage to admit when you've been wrong, and the courage to keep believing in dignity even when the world keeps testing you. So that's my story, and I still wonder sometimes whether things should have happened differently. But I also know that change rarely arrives quietly. Sometimes it arrives in moments that shock everyone in the room. If you think I did the right thing, go ahead and like this video. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Most importantly, tell me what you would have done if you were standing in that conference room when everything went silent. I read the comments, and I'm always curious what other people think about these situations. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you all in the next one.